Since we're starting with roots per se today, even though we've done lots of them via prefixes and suffixes, today we begin a whole new way of approaching learning words and where they come from, which is root-based. The root is going to be at the top of each of the slides. We're going to start with nothing but the root and the Latin or Greek word that it came from. It'll either be L or it'll be GK, meaning Greek, but it won't be anything else. Okay, so I gave you Germanic stuff before just to complete the picture, to give you an idea of kind of the distribution of Greek, Latin, and Germanic elements when it comes to prefixes and suffixes. But from now on, we're all about Greek and Latin. What I try to do is illustrate each of the words that comes up in relation to each of the roots that I put up here by means of an image or more than one image. And the images that I grab are almost always me typing into Google Image what's on the first page of Google Image for each of these things. Why? Laziness? No. Because I think there's something to it. And it's just to give you an idea of what happens, especially with some of these abstract words that we're going to learn, when you go to Google Image and try to get a sense of what the collective consciousness is when it comes to each of these terms. What's going on? What will people find if they search for this term on Google? It's most interesting when it's an abstract term, like intervene or something, okay? And like, whoa, what images come up? Kind of interesting. And I find that almost always the images that come up are very helpful in my attempt to get across to you the relationship between the root and the word. Okay, so what do I want you to do? It's paying attention to how the different words relate to the root in different ways. So you have this one root that goes back to one word and then, more or less one idea corresponding to that word in ancient Greece or in ancient Rome, or both. Okay? And then the question is, how did that one root translate into English by being imported into it and having English words derived from it? And there's no system to it, there's no science to it, there's an art to it, to internalizing the relationships that we're talking about. And there's no less at stake in determining these things than internalizing English vocabulary in a way that you probably couldn't otherwise do. There's something about etymology. Yeah, you can't rely entirely on etymology to know English words, but it's a foundation you can't do without if you're going to do more than just get an impressionistic notion of what words mean based on, quite often, the misuse of them in common currency. I try to start as simple as possible with words that are most obviously connected to the meaning of the root. So in Latin, curro means I run. So a course in English, I put C-U-R up there as the root. The C-U-R-R is directly from Latin, and the C-O-U-R is from Latin through Old French. When a word from Latin is not quite imported into French, because French is really modern Latin, just like Spanish, Italian, Romanian, and Portuguese are. But how it manifests itself in that language. And quite often, U's will turn into OU's when it goes from Latin to French. Get ready for that throughout the whole semester. Okay? So quite often, words come from Latin into English, not directly from Latin, although quite often it does, usually it does, but indirectly through French. Okay? More so than any of the other Romance languages. And that has to do with history. That has to do with William the Conqueror, 1066. So a course, like what you're taking right now, right? A course, why is it called that? First image is a course that you run. And why is it called a course that you run on? Because curro means run, and it's the thing that you run on. Straightforward and easy, okay? Nobody knows that, but it's true, all right? When you take a course, such as this one, you have different weeks, and you have different assignments, and you have different sessions that you learn different things on, or in. So that's the idea behind calling a college course a college course. In a particular class, that's us, we have a course of material that we will cover throughout the semester. And that the idea is that we're running from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next. So there's the metaphor of running for you, okay? And then when you have a courier, you see that word all the time and nobody knows what it means. They just know it impressionistically because it's on the side of vans and you know it's associated with delivering and things like that. But now you know that it's connected to curro, meaning run, okay, through French, just like course, and that's why I'm putting those together. Okay, so a courier is someone who runs things from one place to another, i.e. delivers them from one place to another. Now in New York, when you use that word, you're usually thinking of people on bikes, but that's not only, that's not always the case. So in this case, Central Courier, same day, overnight delivery. This guy is delivering things all over the place. We're still on the through French, Latin root, cour, with that OU. And so when two people engage in discourse, now you're using it even more abstractly. You're not talking about a physical place where you run. You're not talking about an actual person who runs around from the point of origin to wherever they're delivering to. But now we're talking more abstractly in the sense of speaking to each other via discourse. So the product of our speaking to each other, usually one-on-one in this context, is discourse. So as you know, the dis means away, right? Doesn't mean away from, like ab, but it means away, okay? And then the course means to run. So when you engage in discourse, in effect, the exhalations of air producing words that mean something to the other person are running from your mouth into the ears of the other person and vice versa, right? And so you see the connection there between what's going on in discourse and what's going on in what a courier does or what someone who's running a race does when they run on a course. You see that? And so that's what I mean by paying attention to the relationships between the words and the roots and seeing, on the one hand, lots of differences between them, but on the other hand, similarities that you wouldn't see at first unless you really kind of dug deeply into it. Okay, that's the idea here. And then that's what it really means to learn English vocabulary, to take the time to think about these relationships, to really get how these words are working in, again, more than an impressionistic way. There are different meanings to recourse. First of all, a source of help in a different situation, and the sentence that this dictionary gives is surgery may be the only recourse. Running back to. So say you're in a situation and you need some help. When you have recourse to something, it metaphorically means that you're running back to it in order to get help from it, okay? So surgery may be the only recourse. In other words, you have to run back to surgery. Or the use of someone or something as a source of help in a difficult situation. So the sentence given is a means of solving disputes without recourse to courts of law. Okay, guys? So that's a very abstract use of this root. And I tend to focus on more concrete terms that that do lend themselves to images, but it's sometimes not, as in this case. All right, so here, I love this one because we've all experienced it, and we've all heard it over the intercom when they every once in a while mention the concourse, go to the something concourse, this and that, and now you'll know why it's called that. When you go to an airport, when you go to a train station, it's the place where all the gates and all the restaurants and all the ticket booths and all the whatever are located. It's where everything melds. It's where everything comes together, where everything runs to, if you will. Okay, and because you spent all that time patiently learning the prefixes, you know that con comes from cum in Latin, meaning with or together, and so you know it means running together. It's the place where everyone runs together, as opposed to apart from each other, going to their particular gates and jumping on their particular airplanes. Okay? So that's why it's called a concourse. It's where everybody runs to. Everybody meets. All right. So when you talk about the current of the water, and I was going to just show a picture of the ocean moving, but the idea here is usually when you speak about currents, you're dealing with a particular body of water that leads in a particular direction with a more or less strength. And so that's the original meaning of the word current. You guys know that ent means state of, or it means being, right? It means being. So current, it means being, running, right? It means being and running. Ent is the suffix, and cur is the root. Okay, so being, running. And really, when you say being, running, you're just saying running, right? Because being, everything's being, if you think about it, right? Everything has being. Otherwise, you wouldn't be saying it's a thing. So it's kind of redundant, but you're not going to call it cur because then you would think it means run. You'd think it's the verb. So you have to have an ending that means to be. And this is an example of that. So we learn that among all those different suffixes that mean to be. This is one of them. Okay, so a current. Then current is also, as you know, used in other ways than to refer to a body of water, such as current events, current affairs, things like that. What does it mean? Now you're going to know. Current events mean coming out. An event is something coming out, and then current means running. So something coming out and running. So current events are things that are out there in the open that are running around for you to pay attention to. That's what it literally means. Okay? And then when you talk about currency, it means it's flowing. It's a method of payment, method of trading value that is relevant, that you can use, that is still alive, okay, that is out there and that is has lifeblood to it in terms of value. Okay, that's why it's called currency. It's current. It's something current. To be is the E, the Y at the end, and then current. It's something current. It's what you can use now, as opposed to some of those old coins or bills that you see that are no longer in circulation but still cool as collector's items. You see what I mean? So currency isn't always currency. Sometimes it dies like languages supposedly die, although they never do, because then they just take on different forms. And then concurrently, I don't have concurrent by itself because it's not as often used as the adverb concurrently. When you talk about two or more things occurring concurrently or happening concurrently, being, running together. So you say two things happen concurrently, you're saying they run together, they run parallel with each other, they occur at the same time. Pretty cool, right? All right, so I told you that we would get to curriculum and compare it with course. What's a course? A course is just one platform for a class. It's one course, and there's various lessons that we'll be going over throughout the semester. We'll be running from one lesson to the next. A curriculum, now it's not just one class you're talking about, but rather a bunch of classes in a particular institution of learning. And now you're talking about what different classes they have to offer. So it has the same root as course, meaning running from one thing to the next within one class or one classroom, but then you pull back and you're talking about a bunch of classes that are offered at that institution of learning. And then the curriculum is what all of those different classes have to offer in the larger picture of the institution collectively. In ancient Rome, they had a particular order of things that you would go in if you wanted to be a politician, called the cursus honorum, the course of honors, sort of the order in which you would achieve one office after another until you finally got to be at the head of the offices as a consul, kind of the equivalent of one of the two presidents of Rome. But I think we're getting a good enough idea of what's going on here. Okay, we're talking about movement within a class or movement of a bunch of different classes within one institution that encompasses all those classes. And extracurricular activities, extracurricular sports, etc., as, for example, as opposed to intramural sports, which means inside the walls of whatever school you're at. Extracurricular literally means outside of the curriculum of a given school. So if you're on the chess team or something, you're going to go to engage in extracurricular or taking karate or whatever. That's extracurricular. That's outside of school. That's outside of the curriculum. All right, and there's the extracurricular dude. He's like, yeah, he's good at school, but he's also engaging in all those different sports. Okay, this is kind of fun stuff. Cursive is dying, as you know, because everybody's typing instead of writing. Cursive is synonymous with handwriting for the reason that you can write it faster, right? So when you print, you have to write one letter, and then when you do cursive, as opposed to writing one letter and then pulling the pen back from the page and then starting another letter and pulling it back, that's not any kind of running I know about. Cursive is figuratively running the pen along the paper without break, without pause. So you're running to the end of the line, and then back, and you're running to the end of the line, over and over and over, one line after another. That's why it's called cursive writing. Kind of creative. Right? And it's important to know that these words originate, nobody knows the individuals responsible for coming up with these words. You know, it's not to say that there's not neologisms, that means making up words, that aren't attributed to individuals. That happens sometimes. But more often, and almost all of the words that we're looking at this semester, if not all of them, we don't know who's responsible, what individuals are responsible for inventing stuff, but we do know that the further back you go in time, the more it was taken for granted that Latin and Greek were known, you know, by just about everyone who was so-called cultured. Okay, not to be patronizing about it, but that was the idea. Okay, starting especially with the Renaissance, but then where these words came from way back before that, and this idea that those making up these words were well versed in the meanings of these Greek and Latin terms, and so why not? They were quite often creative in the way that they made up these terms, and cursive is kind of a creative way to describe what's going on when you do handwriting. You're running across the page. Okay? But yet another variation on this idea of running. It's another way to talk about running in a figurative way. Cursor runs around the screen. Okay? So when you write cursive, you run the pen, or the pen runs across the page. When you use a cursor, it's running along the screen, all over the screen, all over the monitor. And the word cursory is also related to running. It has to do with something done really quickly and superficially. Okay, so when this teacher is talking about the missing add-ins, and so 3 plus blank equals 10, this kid is taking it literally and saying, hey, shouldn't we do a cursory search for the missing add-ins? Okay, the idea in this case being that, hey, let's at least give a short search for these things. We don't have to take forever looking for them, but let's do a really quick search. So when someone uses the word cursory attention given to something, or someone is given a cursory glance, they look really quickly, that has to do with, you know, a running glance. Okay, if someone looks over quickly, a cursory glance, as opposed to a really long, reflective paying attention to something. And then we have this quote from Jean Cocteau: beauty cannot be recognized with a cursory glance. Okay, so in other words, you need to reflect on beauty. You need to take your time, just like we're doing in this class with these beautiful words. All right, when you go on an excursion, so an excursion, you guys know the ION ending, en, or shun, or sion, shun. That's just another one of those being ones. So being what? Being running out. Out of what? Out of your house. You go on an excursion. You're out of your comfort zone. You go on an excursion. You go on a running out of wherever it is you're running out of. And an incursion means an attack. And this is from a video game called Incursion. And it is an incursion in the video game Incursion. Okay, what does it mean? Running into or running against. The prefix in, I already told you, can mean two things mainly. It means inside of, and it means into. Remember? So we looked at that circle, and there was the arrow going into it, and that's the into, and then there's the inside of. But in can also mean against sometimes. Okay? In can mean against in the sense that it's into in a violent way. You got me? So it has a kind of ethical baggage attached to it. Right? And this is an example of that. Okay? Incursion means a running, you know, the state of, or a being running into. And that is a way to describe what goes on when one attacks. All right, so occur. When something occurs to you, it runs toward you. It runs up to you. When you are thinking, you're not expecting to think about the thing that occurs to you. The whole idea behind occurrence is a being open, a being receptive to ideas infiltrating your mind. So something occurs to you means it runs up to you. It's kind of cool, right? So an occurrence, something that runs up. Now, if it's not to you as a thinker, it can mean that something that just happens seemingly randomly, okay, an occurrence. There are two main prefixes that tend to be chameleons. They change based on the first letter of the root that follows them. Okay? OB quite often changes to OC, to O whatever, based on what the root that follows it begins with. But way more common than OB is AD, or odd, that means toward. Okay, odd means toward, remember that? So advice or whatever, okay, so toward. And so the D in add will change to C, it'll change to all kinds of different things based on what the beginning of the root is. Get used to it, you guys, okay? There's a lot of variability, or actually I should say mutability to linguistic elements. It happens with consonants and it happens with vowels. There's going to be changing going on all the time, and it almost always has to do with to make things easier to say. Okay? That's the idea. So an occurrence is the state of running toward somebody or something. Or whenever I say state of, I mean being. It's the same thing. State of or being. Being running toward somebody or something. Okay. And then finally, for this root, to recur, for something to recur, as you know, re means again or back. So it means to run back. Okay, so this guy walking in circles, what he encounters is a recurrence. He sees the same footsteps because he's going in a circle. And that's kind of metaphorical for things in life that just repeat themselves over and over.